Welcome back to another episode of Making the Hardest Game on Steam. Squime is a rage game where you control a character with two arms separately using a controller. Compared to traditional games, it requires an insane amount of coordination. To beat the game, you must climb over 1,000 meters on one large level, with the risk of losing a significant amount of progress at any given time. Out of the 100 players who have tried the game, so far only 30 have completed it. Clearly, this is too many, which means obviously we have to make the game harder. But before that, let's take a look at all the changes I've made since the last video. First off, multiplayer is now up and working, which means I can spy on people failing obstacles. To do this, I use something called Steam Networking Sockets. Valve lets you use this in the Steamworks API to make peer-to-peer connections for free. Here's how it works. When you start the game, you will search for a lobby with an open slot, and if there isn't one, you will make a lobby. Squime currently supports up to 16 players in one lobby, so with peer-to-peer connections, every player needs to form an individual connection with every other player in the lobby. To decide which player is the host for each connection, I compare each player's Steam ID, and the player with the lower Steam ID becomes the host. This is an easy way to do it because players already know each other's IDs when joining the lobby, and they don't need to do any additional communication to decide who will be the host. When the connection setup completes, players send some additional information like their cosmetics and their position, and which arms they've picked up. Aside from that, it's pretty simple. I just have to send a little bit of extra data when you change your cosmetics or when you move in the game. Okay, not every time you move, but you pick a tick rate like 20 for example, and send a movement update 20 times per second if you've moved since the last update. Then, where you receive these updates, you have to make sure to interpolate between the newest packet and the one before that, which is basically like generating all of the in-between frames for the character. Now things will look smooth even when sending updates slowly, only 20 times per second. In the following update, I added a few cosmetics you can get by completing trials that are hidden around the map. There's one in the Ruin Zone, Floating Isles, and the Spring Zones currently. I try to make these hard to get to because they're not meant to be completed until you're better at the game, but technically you can do them on your first playthrough too. Yeah, except for this one, you need to come back here after you beat the game with two arms. I just love the idea of having more hidden challenges to do on the main map. They help add feelings of wonder, mystery, and adventure. And it's also great having all sorts of extra things to do if you want to mess around in the world while waiting for maybe a less experienced friend to get past a certain point. For beating a trial, you now get accessories that you can equip in the cosmetics menu. This menu lets you preview cosmetics and also tells you how to unlock them when you select them. In Squime you can already wave to people without emotes, but I still added a couple so far. There's Happy and Angry. To make these, I used the animator to move a mask around to function as an eyelid, and I used a particle system to make the hearts. And also I animate this anger icon sprite. It took me a bit of time to decide how a slime making noise would sound, but eventually I realized I could just use the NPC talk sounds I made previously, with their pitch shifted a little bit if I combine them in a sequence like this. This brings me to the most recent update where I finally implemented replays. The data you need to use for replays is similar to multiplayer, but instead of sending the data, you're just adding the movement updates to a list. I rent a cheap server from Hetzner to store the replays. When you view different leaderboards in the pause menu, if there's a cloud icon, that means you can download and view the replay. I took a lot of inspiration from how Pogostuck does this, so you can put the replays in the world and you can race them, or you can spectate from their perspective. Implementing replays was pretty straightforward overall, but I still ran into some bugs while skipping. You have to read through every state on the way to where you skip, or you might miss an important update like when the player gets an arm or loses an arm. Hopefully this is okay to show on YouTube. Anyway, I got a couple other small controls implemented like slowly seeking, quickly seeking. You can speed up replays or slow them down. And you can even leave it sped up when you race it in the world. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to our first new challenge game mode. Both of the game modes I added are considerably harder than playing regularly, and I don't expect a lot of people to be able to beat them. Though a couple people already beat them and completely destroyed my times. Just for you, I'm making the next map a lot harder. So the first new game mode gives your character shorter arms, and because of how Climb works, this basically makes your character a lot weaker, and your jumps smaller. You have to be really precise to get the maximum force out of your jumps, swinging both of your arms right when you take off of the ground. Here's an example of just jumping with one arm versus with two for comparison. The other new game mode is one arm mode, which was heavily requested. The only thing I had to change was these drop sequences so that they only require one arm, but aside from that, miraculously you can complete the entire game without any additional modifications to the level on both of these modes. Even this jump that looks impossible is still possible in a variety of ways. You can jump off an asteroid, do a vertical wall jump, or you can just abuse the gravity of the planets like this. I made no changes to the map. That is, until the final sequence. The final sequence in Climb is the only part of the game where I had to make a small adjustment. Some of the jumps are just a bit out of reach, so I made this new mechanic to give a small boost to your current velocity when your body hits it. For beating the game modes, you can unlock some new styles for your arms. Tiny arms gives you tiny floating hands, and one arm mode gives your arm hilts, making them look like swords. I said I've been working on a harder version of the original map, and it now has an official name. At this point I've redone the entire level zone by zone, and I've even added a new zone. It's almost 1200 meters in total, and every zone now has an end sequence. I nerfed the recovery mechanic so you end up falling between the zones a lot more commonly. When testing, I fell all the way from 99% down to about 55%. My goal with this level is to make close to the absolute hardest map that I can beat. Playtesting this map was brutal. It took me over 8 hours on multiple days to end up beating it. And that's with me knowing every part of the level ahead of time, and playing my game for hundreds of hours beforehand. I guarantee even the best players will take many hours to beat this map. It pushes every single mechanic to its absolute limit. In the next video, I'll take you through it zone by zone, explaining the inspirations for each zone and my design choices in detail. But for now, you'll just have to enjoy this preview. Thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. If you'd like to support the channel, I set up a Patreon where I'll be posting some blogs about random game development topics, as well as some really terrible old prototypes of Slime, if you're into that sort of thing. Be sure to check out my games on Steam if you haven't already, and subscribe to get notified when I make a video. To finish things off, here are some clips I have from enjoying the multiplayer update with everyone.